When we talk about mobile application development, we need to understand how different strategies can be used to develop applications which will run on mobile devices. When we talk about mobile devices, we tend to talk about phones and tablets rather than PCs or laptops, which, although may be mobile in their nature, aren't really what we're talking about in this style of development. When we talk about mobile application development, we tend to be targeting a certain subset of operating systems. Now, this isn't the whole picture. I know this isn't the whole picture of what happens in mobile applications and in mobile devices, but principally for commercial development, we would be looking at Apple iOS, Google Android, and Microsoft Windows Mobile. Now, Microsoft Windows Mobile is perhaps a special case where it's only got 0.3% or 3% of the market at the moment, but people are still saying that Microsoft may do something with it one day. I'm not so sure. So let's talk about how the things happen when we want to make applications work on these devices. The first type of application that might be developed is what's called a native app. And a native app is one which has full access to everything that the device can offer. And therefore it's very closely tied to the manufacturer of the device. If you're targeting an Apple iOS development, it's likely that you'll develop in something called Objective-C. Now, the Objective-C might be wrapped up inside Swift, but it's definitely going to be a different type of language, and some would say that Objective-C is quite tricky. I'd say it's very demanding, and if you have an understanding of C-based languages, you should be okay with it. The second type of application that you might want to develop is for Google Android, and for that we would have to use something called Java. If you want to get the full native application development environment, you might install Android Studio, or you might write straight in Java and develop your apps for Google Android in that way. And for Microsoft Windows Mobile, it's likely that you'll use a language like C# inside Visual Studio, and you'll develop your applications using the platform called .NET Core or .NET 4.5, 4.6, using one of their SDKs, which is a software development kit, and you'll develop your Microsoft Windows applications in that way. Now, immediately you've got a problem. If you have an idea for an app, and it's going to be a large-scale app which will be distributed through the various stores that these organizations have to sell apps, then you have to have three skills. You have to have a skill in Objective-C, you have to have skills in Java, and you have to have skills in C#. And whilst they are all C-based languages and the constructions that you might use would be very similar, the implementations are very different when it comes to making applications and addressing the native features of the devices that are used by these different application manufacturers and device manufacturers. There's a growing trend in development, and that's for web development. The web has become increasingly powerful with the inception of different strategies from the ones that used to be used. In the good old days, when we had just HTML, web pages were static, content rich perhaps, but very static, and didn't really do anything other than deliver content in one direction only. With the advent of HTML5 and JavaScript and CSS3, applications and websites, you might want to call them applications or websites, are very much more powerful than they used to be. Let's make it really clear what these three things are for. HTML5 is not a programming language. It's a simple system of markup language, which puts the pieces of your website in the places that you want them to be in the website when it's read in a browser. JavaScript is where the interactivity comes in, and JavaScript can make things happen in a browser that is similar to what happens in application programming. So JavaScript makes HTML interactive, perhaps. CSS3 is a styling language which is applied to HTML5, and CSS3 gives a rapid styling toolkit which makes you able to create features that are common across the whole of your site by creating them once and using them many times. Now in HTML5 you might also couple a thing called Bootstrap. Now Bootstrap is a styling mechanism that was developed by Twitter, and this Bootstrap can make windows appear in any size you want. So no longer are you styling your HTML5, your JavaScript and CSS3 for a simple desktop or laptop browser. You can make it responsive to replying to the requests from different types of devices where different layouts are required. So HTML, JavaScript and CSS3 are a great system for developing websites. Now wouldn't it be lovely if there was a bridge between these three things and the three styles of development for mobile applications? There will be. But first, these three things, JavaScript, HTML5 and CSS3, quite often are developed as three separate things. Scripts for JavaScript being in one place, files for HTML5 being in one place, and CSS files being in another. So the idea was developed by Google for a thing called a framework. And a framework is a way in which you bring different components together under a different automation system, and they developed a thing called Angular. Google Angular is now Angular 4, I think, but now just called Angular, the same way as Windows is supposed to be just called Windows. Came through 1, went to 2, missed out 3, and is now in version 4. And Angular is a really convenient way of packaging JavaScript, HTML5 and CSS3 into a single framework which can talk to each other. All these files have a relationship with each other, and it's based around the concepts of components. And what a component is something in a web page. Anything in a web page. It might be a navigation bar, it might be a film playing, it might be all sorts of things, but it's a thing in a web page. And this thing might need JavaScript, might need CSS3, might need HTML5, might need Bootstrap. And so these Angular components enable you to bring these things together to make the development of interactive websites very much more easy. However, its main speciality was for the development of a thing called a single page application, a SPA. And a SPA is something that we will discuss in greater detail. But what it is in sort of main concept terms is that you create a website and all of your website is contained in a single page. Some of the page will stay the same throughout the life of the web page or the website, and the web page. For example, the sidebar, the top bar, the bottom bar, the footer, all those other things might stay the same, and the content just responds to requests from the users. As the user makes a request, the content changes and is updated by Angular. Now, Angular is quite complicated, and it's not necessarily designed for what we want to do, which is making web apps. Now, native apps are designed in the Objective-C, Java and C# or whatever language you're using in Windows. And web browser apps exist just as web pages that you can display on a browser on a mobile application device. Any mobile application device will have a browser that you can display. So a system was developed by a company called Drifty, called Ionic. And it's built on Angular. And what it's really trying to do is to style single page applications for mobile devices. And it offers a really huge number of shortcuts for making the styling of applications so that they work and look good on mobile devices. Ionic also drifts away from the whole concept of single page applications. It allows you to develop single page applications, but it makes it really easy to implement the sorts of separate pages or screens that we would expect to see in a mobile application. So it converts what Angular has done and extends it as well with new facilities that could be included in your design. But we still have a discontinuity. A website is just a website. A website is nothing really to do with the native applications. It can be displayed on a mobile device, of course, but it's still just a web page. There's a company called Apache, and Apache is very famous for the creation of a web server. And they developed a system called, well, it was before then there was a company called PhoneGap. And it was bought out by Apache, and they called it Cordova. And what Cordova does is takes JavaScript, HTML5, and CSS3, using Webpack and ES6, and transpiles it, lovely word, into the code that's needed for native application devices. Largely it's very successful, and the transpilation is hugely effective. What this enables us to do is that if we have a mobile application which is built using Ionic, JS or Angular, JS, HTML5 and CSS3, our application now has access to the native features of the device on which it will run. The storage, the camera, the microphone, all those sorts of things are now available for our application to use. We've developed what's called a hybrid application. Now you'll hear the other term that was quite common, which is a progressive web application. And a progressive web application is just a hybrid application which has persistence and doesn't need an internet connection. So that's our picture. We're going to try and target applications that would work on Apple, Android and Windows Mobile using a web development system framework called Ionic, which is passed through Cordova to transpile it into native applications. Now it must be really clear that we won't do all of that. We will create a system of demonstration which shows what would happen if you were to do it in the real world. There is nothing to stop you taking what we learn and making apps for the web stores. Nothing at all. The fundamental principles will be the same. You will just have to build on the knowledge that you get from the unit. But this should be a really, really big stepping stone into an application development sort of career. You must be aware, of course, that this isn't the only solution. This isn't the only way of doing this. Angular is one particular framework which was developed by Google. There are two other main frameworks in use when I'm recording this video in August 2017. React is something that's been developed by Facebook and is becoming hugely popular for the development of front ends in JS, HTML5 and CSS. People say that it's very elegant, but it does require an additional learning curve. A similar product is called Vue, V-U-E, Vue.js. And it was developed by some of the people who used to work for Angular, and some people say that it too is a very elegant way of developing front-end applications in a framework. Now at the back end of this process there are other similar types of things which are aiming to do the transpilation of JS, HTML5 and CSS into the native applications. And one of the very famous ones is one which has been bought out by Microsoft called Xamarin, Xamarin. And it does exactly the same. And what you do with Xamarin is you developed everything. Your JavaScript, your HTML5, your CSS, your pages, everything inside Visual Studio, and you write everything in C#. It's a brilliant system. It's a truly brilliant system, and it's going to get better and better. But it's not tending to gain traction just yet in the development community. So that's why I'm going down the pathway that I've decided to go with Angular and Ionic. When we do our application development, we will have a very clear brief to work with in the unit assignment. But we'll do it by doing a demonstration that you will then convert into the scenario set by the specification in the assignment brief. In the next video, what we'll do is we'll get our environment set up. It's very straightforward and it won't cost you anything at all.